We've heard this song before. North County Transit District is in hot water again. The feds find more than a dozen deficiencies in its handling of grants and contracts. The Plaza de Panama plan gets new life in Balboa Park, but the project is overshadowed by a crushing backlog of needed repairs. And Baja California farm workers reach a deal for better pay while the Mexican government copes with new violence in Tijuana and elsewhere. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Union Tribune watchdog reporter Greg Moran. Greg, how you doing?
Good, Mark. Good to see you.
And Roger Sholey, business reporter for the Union Tribune. Hi, Roger.
How are you?
Good to see you back. And KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero. Hi, Jean.
Hey, Mark.
Welcome. So, the troubled North County Transit District has once again been dinged in a compliance review by federal transit officials. The reviews are done every 3 years. The trend is going in the wrong direction for the North County District. Greg, an interesting part of the story, this district had hired a bunch of high-priced consultants to get it right this time. Money wasted.
Well, money perhaps not as well spent as they hoped. As you said, the trend line is going down here. These are triennial reviews that the Federal Transit Administration does to really just to monitor how well they are complying with rules for getting grants and overseeing contracts and things like that. It's very administrative and bureaucratic. For most agencies, this is, not a heavy lift. But the North County Transit District has been struggling with this for a number of years now, 6 years. In 2009, they had one. It's called the deficiency, one error, one problem with a contract. In 2012, there were 7, and this year there were 13. And the 13, as you mentioned, came after the district has, by my estimation, spent at least $500,000 on consultants to get them ready for these reviews.
All right, we're going to get into some of those details in a minute. What were the nature of these deficiencies, these 13 they found this year?
Some of them, as I said, it's pretty administrative, very bureaucratic. Some of them are kind of minor, like you don't have a certain a piece of paperwork in a lobbying disclosure form or a Buy American certificate that says when you are buying these items or doing this contract, you'll comply with these regulations. So those are kind of administrative. Others are more serious. You didn't do a cost-price analysis. You hadn't followed certain procurement rules and things like that. And to be fair, and the district says this, you can have one contract that has several errors in it, and it counts towards that 13. But these were at least half a dozen different grants or contracts where the auditors found pretty significant problems.
Now, of course, we have had this rail safety in the news, that tragedy in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia with the Amtrak disaster. Does a report like this raise safety concerns for rail commuters?
Not exactly. I don't think so, because that's sort of an operational kind of materials type of thing. These really, they have guys come in and they open or people come in and they open your files and they look through and they say, well, you have a checklist, and they say, well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that.
How are you spending your money? How are you spending efficiently, protecting the public's money?
And when we, all these transit agencies really rely on state, federal, local grants. That's all money coming in. A lot of it, there is some revenue they get from fares, but a lot of this are supported by grants. And so these come by to say, okay, we gave you this grant to do X, Y, and Z. Here are the rules when you do X, Y, and Z. Did you follow them?
Mm-hmm. Greg, did this happen to other agencies in California, around the country?
Yeah, the FTA does this for I think any transit agency, mass transit or whatever that gets some kind of federal assistance or federal grants, which are probably all of them, will go through this triennial review. And for most, as I said, it's something you want to do well on. It's not a heavy lift. A lot of these are fairly routine.
Now, Executive Director Matt Tucker, as we've said, he tried to do the right thing. Tell us about these consultants he hired. I mean, these are firms that do this stuff. They have experience in this.
Yeah, so it starts with in 2012, they hired a consultant to kind of look at all of the North County Transit operations, but also to kind of look at their procurement thing. They made a bunch of recommendations about the organization, which began to be put into effect when the last review happened, which was in 2012. In order to get ready for that review, they then went out and hired another consulting firm for about $150,000 to get them ready for that review. That review came out with 7 deficiencies. 2015 starts rolling up, and in 2014 they hired a third
third time the charm.
Third one to get us ready. They said that they were ready. They said in 2013 that their procurement manual was up to date. and then the review happens, and they have they have almost twice as many deficiencies as they had before, and
Are they the same problems or new ones?
A lot of the problems are focused in this area of procurement, which is contract letting and stuff like that. There are others in, they call them technical assistance and things like that. But no, it's not sort of the same contract or the same grant or anything like that. It's sort of in the same general area of operations and how you do things. They seem to have kind of a pretty consistent problem with their procurement operations, with how they get contracts and oversee them.
Now, what did the director, Matt Tucker, what did he have to say about these deficiencies?
He says a couple things. He says, well, we're not happy with the bad review, but he says something that he said in 2012 and that he said in 2009 as well, which is that he came on board in late 2008 to an agency that was troubled, that had a budget deficit, was struggling, and they came in and sort of transformed the culture. They changed how they do business. They outsourced a lot of their operations, but in doing that, in changing how they do business, they have an enormous number of consultants and people that they deal with. That is an organizational transformation or change which has yet to set in. So he said, that they knew that they were going to have some of these problems, not happy with them, but, better luck next time.
All right, we did have Matthew Tucker. He was on Evening Edition. This was from last July. He was addressing the issue of turnover at NCTD, but he did say something about management I think was interesting. Let's hear what he had to say.
The fact of the matter is we do ask lots of questions. We do ask our employees hard questions. We do look at the work that they do, that we do scrutinize them. And if we don't think it's where it needs to be, we ask them to continue to work on it. I don't apologize for that. That's part of doing the job, being due diligent and asking tough questions and expecting people to do their best.
All right, so he believes that the employees are doing the best job and they're up to snuff on what they're supposed to do to meet these federal requirements, but where's the disconnect?
Well, it's either in sort of the execution, there's a gap between the execution and the ideal, or something else. There has been a lot of turnover at the agency. There has been, they said there have been some, there's differences between the state requirements and federal requirements, but I would, I understand what he says, but I think at some point you should say, look, it's been going on for 6 years. At some point, the transformation has to take hold and the culture has to change, and it doesn't seem to be doing that.
Now, in a related news story this week, a state appellate court said the summary of a report critical of North County Transit managers should be released. That was our KPBS partner, iNewsSource. They had sued to get this report made public. Is this sort of thing pretty beneficial to get the public to see what a critical report is saying about this?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think certainly a public agency, a taxpayer-supported agency with public employees, yeah, you want to see what another consultant and another management guru that they hired said about how the operation is going. So I think that could be helpful if people want to get some more insight or some more perspective about what exactly is going on inside that agency. That kind of leads to, at least in this respect, some bad outcomes.
And they've got, of course, a board in charge of overseeing this, and Matt Tucker has to respond to this board. What are they saying about all this?
I contacted a couple of them, and as I think has been true throughout this 5 or 6 year period where he's been running it, they seem to be very supportive of him publicly. They're not really questioning. I mean, a couple of them said, we don't like getting bad reviews. Any review is bad, but we're convinced we're on the right path. We think we'll do better in the future. And they kind of support the executive director. Now, if you go back to 2012, they're saying the same thing. And in 2000, saying the same thing. So, he has the support of the board. There is nobody that I know of, who has come out and said, we need a change. And in fact, last year, they gave him a new contract and a raise. So.
All right. Well, we'll have to see what happens as we go forward and what those folks are saying. All right, we're going to shift gears now. A $43 million plan by Qualcomm co-founder Irwin Jacobs to transform the heart of Balboa Park was dropped 2 years ago because of lawsuits. But last week it was given new life, maybe. The idea was to build a bypass off Cabrillo Bridge and funnel traffic to a new garage, eliminating cars and giving pedestrians more green space in Plaza de Panama in the heart of the park. Now, Roger, start with the details, the cost of that plan. And before I get you going on that, I should say that Irwin Jacobs is a major funder of KPBS, longtime funder.
Well, that was going to be the star attraction of the centennial of the Balboa Park exposition this year. They were going to clear out the cars from the plaza. They were going to build a 800-space parking garage, add a new open space, beautify the center, and get rid of cars and traffic intermingling with the pedestrians. That stopped because of environmental lawsuit by the Save Our Heritage organization, and then it was appealed by the city and Mr. Jacobs' committee, and they won in court, as you said. I asked Jacobs' office what he's going to do about it. He said he hadn't read the report yet, but he was going to, and the mayor said he was going to think about it as well, but I think that for all intents and purposes, the plan is dead.
Okay, so its time has kind of passed. And now this was very controversial, this whole idea. And tell us why. Who was opposed to it, and what was their beef?
Well, the critics were happy about getting rid of the cars and parking in the middle of the park, but they were not happy about the way it was going to be done by having this bypass off the Cabrillo Bridge, because they felt that would hurt the historic character of the entrance to the park. And the counter to that was that it's a small price to pay for pedestrianizing the center of the park.
Okay, and as you say, it looks like, from what Irwin Jacobs is saying, that the time has passed for this plan. We're not going to see a revision.
At the time it was thrown out by the courts, he said, okay, I'm sorry, and I'll go on and do something else. And he never really said if he won the lawsuit that he would come back with his about $30 million in support he's going to give to the project.
Yeah, a lot of money involved, right?
So there aren't cars in the center of the park now. Bob Filner, I think, accomplished it with some cones and some DG. Is that right? They put it in the middle.
What did the former mayor do?
Well, the former mayor, one of the only things he did that's memorable in a positive sense was that he, for the first time in 60 or 70 years, the mayor actually did something with that problem. And he got rid of the parking lot. There still are cars and traffic in the middle of the park, and that still is a bit of a problem for pedestrians. So it didn't solve the problem that Jacobs had in mind, which was to get rid of all the cars and make it truly a pedestrian zone.
So if you want that in the park, there would still be a need, I suppose, for this kind of a project, but not much will by Jacob. I'm interested how this fits in with the whole centennial celebration of Balboa Park. I mean, this really is, to anybody who's been there, who has a bad thing to say about Balboa Park? Nobody.
Well, maybe the people that stuff's falling on their heads.
Yeah,
we'll get to that.
We'll get to that in a moment. But it took the wind out of the sails of the celebration, because all the other big donors sort of stepped back and said, well, if they're going to treat our #1 philanthropist in San Diego this way, count me out. Right. So the celebration has been a lot less full of crazy, wonderful events, although the museums have all put on some great shows.
So the big, huge centennial blast of the extravaganza, it really is tied to this setback at the beginning with the Jacobs plan.
It just seems we're not doing right by the park. I mean, there's 100 years of one of the really great civic assets anywhere in any city that I've seen, and it's kind of muted. We're going to have a little jumpy or something, and that'll be the party. It doesn't seem to be a whole lot of...
Well, I mean, if you think about it, San Francisco had a fair that was several times bigger than San Diego's the same year and isn't doing a thing to celebrate it.
Well, there you go.
It's exposition. So
sparklers and sheet cake looks pretty
Chicago,
good.
when they had their 1893 fair 100 years later, they couldn't put on anything. So
Chicago.
And St. Louis, so a lot of these fair cities never really do much with the way of anniversaries.
All right, I do want to change over now to this whole issue of maintenance and this deferred maintenance in the park here. Aside from this whole pedestrian and car issue, what's going on? It's been neglected for a long time, and as we said, some folks have actually had pieces of ceilings fall on their heads and things.
Well, that's a little bit exaggerated. On that one point, the piece of sculpture that was supposedly fell on somebody in the walkway was didn't fall down. They removed it because it was looking like it was coming loose. They took it back, and they're going to recreate it and put it back up on this arcade.
Okay, but the overall point is a lot of deferred maintenance in the park, right?
So if you're a visitor and you don't really know the park intimately, you can walk through, say, to a beautiful place, these old buildings, most of them are rebuilt, landscaping fabulous in spite of our drought, where it's a beautiful garden, it's a world renowned, it's a national landmark. But anybody who's been in San Diego very long and starts to look at the buildings little by little, you'll see cracks, you'll see algae, you'll see peeling paint, you'll see pieces of sculpture gone.
We've had plumbing problems.
Plumbing problems, electrical problems, internet problems. The list goes on endlessly. And the master plan for the park in 1989 talked about all this, and follow-up specific plans did as well. And at the time, they said maybe $250 million, $300 million in needs would be required to fix it. But this isn't just Balboa Park. The whole city, the whole public sector of San Diego is not keeping up with its facilities.
Emblematic of deferred maintenance citywide.
It's just that this is the crown jewel. If you're going to spend any money on anything to polish up your prized possession, you're going to take care of the thing you treasure most. And the city, for all its boasting about we're improving infrastructure, we're dealing with our backlog, there was a number that Todd Gloria, the city councilman for the area, said the other day was, we've spent $62 million on Balboa Park, rah, hurrah. Well, if you look at the actual details, only 1% of that was actually maintenance by the city itself. All the other money came from the state or donations or some other source. So the city itself is not spending what it should be on its own facilities.
Now, I did want to talk about the Friends of the Park, the folks who oversee the park, the Conservancy and all. Tell us about these groups that are kind of, I don't know if they're battling, but there's some tension there in overseeing the park and the Conservancy itself, which just got a new CEO.
Yeah. Well, the park, it's almost like the city planned it this way so no one would gang up on the city and demand something. So you have 80 or so organizations in the park, all recreation groups, museums and so forth. You have support groups that you mentioned, the Friends, the Balboa Park Conservancy and others. So they all carve out a little piece of their their area they want to focus on. And they battle the city and say, we need more money, and say, thank you very much, and go away. And we'll come back at budget time, and they're happy to get 10 cents on the dollar. And I guess you could say that in any other big city, you'd finally say, we need to do a big deal on this. We ought to have a bond issue to take care of it once and for all. And we have had a number of bond issues in the park. Well, one has ever been approved by the public in the 1960s. And so the San Diego City has the voters have gotten used to getting something for nothing. They don't have to tax themselves to improve anything. And so there is talk of having a big infrastructure bond next year on a number of things.
And this Conservancy, then, we've got a new leader there who has some experience in parks elsewhere. Is that going to make it? Tell us about him.
His name is Tomas Herrera Mishler. He's from Buffalo, an organization that took care of their park system as well. And his job at the Balboa Park Conservancy is to go out to the donors and woo them and hope that they will open their pocketbooks like Mr. Jacobs offered to do and try to solve some of these problems.
Right. So a leader in place and a face on all of this.
Right.
So maybe we'll see some changes, and I'm sure you'll be reporting that as we go along.
I hope they make some progress in this.
All right. All right, we're going to change gears again. It's been a bloody spring in Tijuana after several years of relative calm. More than 100 killings have been reported in the border city since April 1st. It's a chilling reminder of the violence that plagued Tijuana at the height of the drug war. And now an election looms in Mexico, which has brought its own brand of violence. And, Gene, before we get to all of that, there was some news yesterday on the whole very controversial and contentious farm worker front. What happened?
So these are farm workers in Baja California's agricultural valley of San Quintin. It's about 200 miles south of the border, and they've been on strike since March. That strike just ended, actually. They've been in negotiations with the government and growers, and yesterday they had their last meeting in which they signed an agreement guaranteeing higher wages for the farm workers. It's not as much as they were hoping for. They wanted $13 a day, equivalent of pesos, right? Mm-hmm. And the highest wage within the agreement is $11 a day. It's based on a 3-tier system, so bigger farms will pay higher wages, the highest being $11, and smaller farms will pay smaller or lower wages. The farm workers who I've spoken to over the phone about this say that even though the leaders signed the agreement, they're very unsatisfied and very disappointed because they were hoping for the $13 a day.
It is a significant raise, though, over what they were getting, right?
Exactly.
Way in the low, what, $3, $4 range a day, right?
Well, that's the minimum wage in Mexico. They were making around $8 a day, which is high for Mexico, but still, they were very disappointed because last month they sat down with the government, and the government said if the growers aren't able to give you the full $13, we will make up the difference. That was a preliminary agreement that was signed, and that's not going to happen anymore. So the farmers are upset about that.
Okay, and it's a direct impact to us here north of the border, right?
Exactly. Most of the produce that's cultivated in San Quintin ends up getting shipped to the U.S. That's berries, cucumbers, tomatoes. So anything that doesn't get harvested could end up in higher prices for us, which is what was happening over the strike. I mean, not the higher prices, but some of the crop wasn't getting harvested, and it could have threatened prices, and it didn't happen yet. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen, but farmers did mention that they might reorganize in the future.
All right. Now, regarding the violence that I mentioned at the open of this segment, tell us about the nature of these Tijuana killings and why are they attracting attention once again now?
Right, so Tijuana killings in recent weeks, they've become really gruesome and really visible to the general public once again. Experts had believed that these kinds of killings, like public hangings and dismembered bodies on the streets, were in Tijuana's past. 2008 was the most violent year in Tijuana's history, and these kinds of killings were very common. But the past 2 years have been relatively peaceful in Tijuana. That it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Just this week there were multiple shootings. Severed heads were found on the streets, so things like that are starting to happen.
Often is this a sign of a break? I mean, in 2008, that was largely, I think, attributed to the breakdown or the disintegration of the Arneo Felix organization, which had really controlled that plaza for many years in a very ruthless way.
Drug cartel, powerful drug cartel.
Really had controlled the smuggling. So is this an indication that, I think Sinaloa had come in and was thought to be running the show? Are there cracks forming in that now, or what's driving?
Well, security analysts are saying that it's increasingly difficult to pinpoint what the underlying causes of the violence are. There was an agreement between the Arellano Felix organization and the Sinaloa cartel, which is the dominant cartel in Baja California. It's not known whether that's disintegrated, but some people are saying that it may be linked. I mean, it might be changes in the market, it might be shifting alliances. It might also be linked to the April 9th killing of Luis Manuel Toscano. He controlled the drug trade in Tijuana Zona Norte as well as the Tijuana River Canal up until he was killed, and so there may be some tension going on there.
What do you think about the impact of this violence on tourists going to Tijuana?
Right, so it's impossible to know, if tourists are safe, but they are saying, experts and authorities are saying that the victims of this violence have been almost exclusively linked to drug trade activities.
Players
exactly,
involved,
so they're players involved, not innocent bystanders. Also, places like restaurants and bars that are frequented by tourists aren't being targeted right now as they were in 2008 as well as 2010 when the violence reached really extreme levels.
That was the thing that really, I think, shook people up and was really put a dent in the tourism was that, I mean, historically the violence has been between and among the cartels. It really leaked out, and that hyper-violence of the mass killings, the beheadings and things like that were, it wasn't just wrong place, wrong time. I mean, it could be anybody. And it seemed like they had kind of gotten a lid back on that, so...
And it's kind of a delicate time because we are in a recovery. There was a good U.S. jobs report this week and all. The border economy has strengthened a lot. We've had the improvement of the border crossing. The weights are down. They're going to have this pedestrian bridge to the airport. All these good things happening now, and then this thing rears its head again.
Right, exactly. There's always the threat that violence will scare away new investors in the region and hurt business. There's no way to tell right now. It's definitely been a concern at a national level for Enrique Peña Nieto ever since the killing of 43 students in the southern state of Guerrero. People started criticizing his security policies at a time when he's trying to attract all this foreign investment. So it's an issue, and there's a possibility that there will be an impact. However, the business owners I've spoken to in Tijuana the past few weeks say there's not yet been any impact in Tijuana.
All right, I did want to focus on the elections that are coming up Sunday in Mexico, not a presidential election. Tell us about the stakes in that election and what's going on.
Right, so these are midterm elections. It involves 9 state governors, 300 mayors, and 500 members of Congress. And they're pretty important because the results, typically what these midterm elections do is they either support or they stall legislation during the second half of the presidency. So this is either going to make things easier or harder for Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto going forward. Another notable thing about these elections is that there's been a lot of political violence related to it. Already 5 candidates, I believe, have been confirmed killed, but Mexican
That's
media...
nationwide, of course.
Right, nationwide, not in Tijuana. And Mexican media say that number is higher. I think the last number I saw was 21 people killed in election-related violence. So
wow, that's remarkable.
So do these two events then play into that, both the farm worker strike and its settlement and the seemingly surge in violence, street violence in Tijuana among the drug cartels? Are those going to influence the election at all, or were those already kind of baked into the results, do you think?
I'm not sure if they'll be influencing the elections. But I think that was already baked into it, yeah.
And you tell us why a group of teachers is trying to disrupt the elections. What do they want?
So they've been burning ballots and setting fire to polling stations and blocking highways.
We're just not in
throughout
Baja,
Mexico.
throughout
No, this isn't close to us, but it's definitely been happening across Mexico.
Okay.
And they're protesting corrupt politicians and alleged collusion with drug cartels. And basically, what they want, they're trying to disrupt the elections. They've lost faith in the political process. This reflects a general sentiment among Mexicans. A recent poll found that 75% of Mexicans had little to no confidence in any political party. And they're also protesting education reform.
Oh, so a critical midterm. Well, I'm sure you'll be reporting on that Sunday, and we'll see what the results bring next week. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Greg Moran of the Union Tribune, Roger Scholey, also with the Union Tribune, and Jean Guerrero of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.